I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
President John F. Kennedy's bold announcement came right at the height of strained tensions between the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Kennedy's declaration came in the hopes that the United States would put a man on the moon before the end of the 1960s, thus winning the space race between the Soviets and the Americans. Many Americans wanted nothing more than to beat the USSR in the space race, as a fierce rivalry between the two nations had been roaring for decades. Right after World War II, the Cold War began. The two main superpowers in this war were the United States of America and the Soviet Union. Since both of these nations had access to atomic weapons, American and Russian officials both understood that fighting directly could lead to a nuclear apocalypse, so the two countries engaged in a Cold War. The United States and Russia engaged in combat through proxy wars. These wars were fought by different countries, but the Soviets and Americans supported and aided the two separate opposing countries. America and Russia fought the Cold War like a chess game, with the two countries constantly checking each other to make sure the other never gained any more power. As the Cold War continued, tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States ran high. Why did so many Americans care about winning the space race? Many Americans cared because the space race unified a politically and culturally fractured country. The space race was a way for Americans to put aside their differences and come together to root for the United States. The space race began on October 4th, 1957, with the launching of the Russian satellite Sputnik 1. The world's first satellite was about the size of a beach ball, only about 22.8 inches in diameter, with a weight of 184 pounds. It broadcasted for 21 days in 1957. The USSR soon after launched a second satellite, Sputnik 2, accomplishing another feat, putting the first living being, a dog named Laika, into space. The United States was shocked and scared by Sputnik's launch. Many Americans thought that after World War II, America was far more technologically advanced than the Soviet Union, but the launching of Sputnik 1 and 2 showed them otherwise. They believed that if Russia could send a satellite to space, then they could launch ballistic missiles carrying nuclear weapons to the United States. Since both nations had access to hydrogen bombs, America was swept by mass panic and fear. This later led to the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. This treaty prohibited the testing of nuclear weapons in space, underwater, or in the atmosphere. Even though Russia had gotten an early start on the space race, America didn't give up. Quickly after the launch of the Soviet satellites, the United States began developing the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA was officially founded on July 29, 1958. T. Keith Glennon, the first administrator of NASA, approved Project Mercury in October 1958.
Project Mercury was designed to put an astronaut into Earth's orbit. Over 100 candidates had to undergo several physical tests to make sure they were in perfect health. Each candidate was subjected to over 30 different laboratory tests, X-ray examinations, and vigorous physical and mental tests, such as running for hours on treadmills, sitting with their feet in ice water, or blowing up balloons until exhausted. Only 7 were selected. The 7 selected to become astronauts, known as the Mercury 7, were Alan Shepard, Gus Grissom, John Glenn, Scott Carpenter, Wally Schirra, Deke Slayton, and Gordon Cooper. NASA conducted multiple test flights on the Mercury space capsules before considering them safe for humans. These tests included 2 test flights using Redstone launch vehicles and 4 flights using Atlas rockets. These tests helped NASA engineers discover and fix any problems with the capsules. The tests included semi-manned flights with 3 primates named Sam, Ham, and Enos. The astronaut approved to pilot the first Mercury flight was named Alan Shepard. Alan B. Shepard Jr. was born and raised in East Surrey, New Hampshire. After graduating from high school, Shepard was accepted into the United States Naval Academy, where he received a bachelor's degree in science. Alan Shepard served on the destroyer ship Cogswell in World War II. After the war, he earned his pilot's wings from the Naval Test Pilot School. Shepard flew experimental planes and worked as an instructor for the pilot school before attending the Naval War College. Unlike most other astronauts, Mr. Shepard didn't want the popularity that came with going to space, as he was a very private person, known for his icy demeanor. He believed that astronauts shouldn't want stardom, saying,
I think first of all, you have to be there for the right reason. You have to be there not for the fame and glory and recognition and being a page in a history book, but you have to believe there because you believe your talent and ability can be applied effectively to operation of a spacecraft.
Alan Shepard's spacecraft, the Mercury Freedom 7, was a conical one-man capsule with a cylinder attached on top of it. It was 6.8 feet long, 6.2 feet in diameter, and had a 19-foot escape tower that was connected to the cylinder. The blunt end of the cone was covered with an ablative heat shield to protect it against the intense heat of re-entry into the atmosphere. The Freedom 7 capsule wasn't built for comfort, as it was hardly big enough for Alan Shepard to fit in. Shepard could only see Earth from a periscope, as the Freedom 7 didn't have room for large windows. The vehicle that launched Shepard's capsule into space was the Mercury Redstone 3. Redstone rockets were used for the 2 suborbital flights that Project Mercury approved. In 1961, construction on the Freedom 7 capsule and Redstone vehicle was completed.
The United States was ready to put the first man in space, but only 23 days before Shepard's flight, Russia launched Soviet cosmonaut Yuri A. Gagarin into orbit. Gagarin became the first man in space on April 12, 1961, narrowly beating out Alan Shepard. Even though Shepard didn't get the distinction of being the first person in space, he was still excited for his spaceflight. On May 5, 1961, at 9:34 a.m. EST, America watched as Rear Admiral Alan B. Shepard Jr. was launched into space from Cape Canaveral, Florida. His spacecraft reached an altitude of 116.5 miles and a maximum speed of 5,134 miles per hour. Shepard made observations of the Earth and space during his flight by looking through his periscope, as well as making observations and seeing if everything was running smoothly. Alan Shepard also had to pilot the Freedom 7 during re-entry.
So I was going through the motions of flying, but at the same time trying to assess physiologically how I felt and was I dizzy or confused and so on. I looked down through the periscope, which is all we had at that point, and made a few remarks, I think, on the tape.
After only 15 minutes and 28 seconds, the Mercury spacecraft splashed down and was recovered in the Atlantic Ocean, almost 300 miles away from Cape Canaveral. American citizens rejoiced after Shepard's successful spaceflight because it proved that the United States was still in the space race. Alan Shepard was revered as an American hero after his triumphant spaceflight. In the coming days after Alan Shepard's historic flight to space, newspaper headlines were filled with the news of the Americans' triumph. The United States still knew that they were behind in the space race, but the success renewed the country's excitement in the space program. The Fitchburg Sentinel reported, "The successful shot puts the United States back into the space race with Russia. Today's suborbital shot does not match the Russian achievement, but is a major step toward orbiting an American." Shepard's significant flight helped NASA scientists observe what happens to a person's body while in space and how a person functions in zero gravity. His spaceflight also reinvigorated NASA engineers, which led to 5 more Project Mercury missions, 10 Project Gemini missions, and 17 Project Apollo missions. The information that was learned from Alan Shepard's flight was very useful for future spaceflights. NASA engineers utilized this information to orbit a man around the Earth, have a man walk in space, and to eventually land a man on the moon. Even though Rear Admiral Alan Shepard isn't as well known as other space heroes like Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin, his flight was a major contribution to America winning the space race. Without Alan Shepard's barrier-breaking achievement, America couldn't have caught up with the Soviets, or would have even wanted to.